watching a deleted scene from the first episode of Cracking the Code that takes place in an abandoned arcade that might look somewhat familiar. Indeed, it is Flynn's arcade from Tron Legacy. It was a cool homage, but it ran overlong, and we decided not to use it. The song that I wrote for it, though, made the cut. We used it in the trailer, and it seemed to fit so well that we decided it should be the theme song for Cracking the Code. And as you might have guessed, it is called Arcade. The song is in E minor, and the intro chord progression is 1, 6, 4, 7. 1 E minor, 6 C major, 4 A major, and 7 D major. Now I know what you're thinking, there's no A major in E minor. And you're right, that's because there's a C natural, which gives you A minor. But to get A major, you'd need a C sharp. So technically, instead of this, you'd have this. And that is E Dorian. And Dorian definitely has a slightly different sound from natural minor because of that major 4 chord. The only problem with this is that we can't really be in Dorian because if we gave up the C natural, then we couldn't play the C major chord that came right before the A. So it turns out that we're in a key that doesn't really exist. Some mishmash of E minor and E Dorian. Instead, probably an easier way of thinking about this progression is as a type of call and response between 2 different pairs of chords. The first pair goes E minor to C major, which is 1 to 6 in the key of E minor. And then the second pair goes A major to D major, which is really 5 to 1 in the key of D major. So what we've done is we've manufactured a kind of dominant to tonic resolution to D, because D in turn is how we will get back to E. But it is interesting to note that we're missing a dominant chord for the key that we're actually in. In the key of E minor, that would be B major. But there is no B major in our 4 chords. And that's because a lot of times in rock, when songs are written in natural minor, the 7 chord functions kind of like a dominant in that it is the end of the line of your chord progression, the last chord you hit before you return to 1. 1, 6, 7, and back to 1. So, since there is no dominant in the progression, I thought it would be cool to introduce one like this. This 3-chord descending sequence in the bass functions as a kind of hook that helps pull the end of the progression back to the beginning. This type of contrary motion, where the fingers spread apart to reach the wider interval, is totally a counterpoint type technique, and it's done to enhance the resolution to the tonic. In the treble, you approach the tonic from below by chromatic motion. D, D sharp, E. And in the bass, we're approaching the tonic from above by stepwise diatonic motion. G, F sharp, E. When you play them both together, the effect is striking. The combined pull of both of these lines, each moving toward the tonic, really helps button up the chord progression here at the end. And the next time through, we do this as quarter note triplets to really hammer it home. The main riff to the song is based on a classic technique for using chromaticism to evoke a whole range of really cool colors. It works by holding down the root of the chord, which in this case is E, and then taking the 5 of the chord, which is the note B, and raising it up by 1/2 step each time. So we start out with B, which is E minor. We raise it by 1/2 step, we get C major. Raising it another 1/2 step gives us A major, and another 1/2 step and changing the harmony gives us D major. And lo and behold, a coincidence is revealed. Those are, in fact, the intro chords, and that's precisely where they came from. And you've heard this many times before. The James Bond theme is a classic example of the chromatic technique. The rhythm part here is a descending and ascending version of it. Now, we're used to thinking of the Bond theme as kind of a sparse thing, but the reason it sounds so rich is that all these chords are actually being implied behind the scenes. Like the intro section, the riff has a hook that helps glue the repetitions together. It's functionally the same, except now we have a scalar pickup, then an intervallic jump down to the open A string, and then the 3 descending bass note figure. In this case, the figure isn't harmonized, we're playing it straight, because we're going to come back to that counterpoint idea a bit later. There are a couple of dynamic elements that are really important to getting the riff to feel right for me. One of those is muting. The E pedal tone is done with a combination of muted and open notes as a way of accenting certain beats of the measure. By comparison, the pickups are completely muted, and those are paired with tom hits to be as punchy as possible. Then the descending 3-note bass hook is done with wide vibrato and just a touch of right-hand pick harmonics. We're not looking for over-the-top squealing here. We're just trying to add a touch of harmonic to the sound for a little extra color. Right-hand harmonics are one of the cooler paintbrushes that you have as a metal player for colorizing and texturizing your sound. And it's not just for single note playing. All the double stops in this riff are done with some degree of harmonic attack. To me, this is critical to getting the chords to sound like they're being hit with aggression without actually hitting the strings so hard that they go out of tune. Here's what it sounds like straight. And here's what it sounds like with harmonic attack. For me, the definitive and most badass example of this on record is that chord at the end of Atomic Punk. The bridge section is just the chords from the intro section, but ringing for full counts, legato from chord to chord, almost like a damper pedal on a piano. When the drums come back in at the end, we pair that with the counterpoint figure to be as punchy as possible. For the home stretch here, we do one final repetition of the main riff, but we extend it with an E flat and then back to the D. There's no harmonic rationale for this. It's intended to add tension before the final buildup. The final buildup of the song is the counterpoint figure again, but 2 full measures. So instead of going from D to D sharp to E, now to fill up the extra time, we have to go all the way from C to C sharp to D sharp to E. And a handy way to harmonize chromatic motion like this is to use the root first inversion trick. So if we start on C, and we consider that the root of the chord, well, clearly that has to be C major. Then when we move to C sharp, we're looking for the chord whose first inversion starts on C sharp. In other words, the chord where the middle note, the third of the chord, is a C sharp. And that has to be A major. A, C sharp, E. Moving up to D, that's D major. Then D sharp is the first inversion, that's B major. B, D sharp, and F sharp. And that is our dominant chord, which of course resolves to the tonic the next half step up. And that dominant to tonic resolution is the underpinning of this entire sequence in the first place, even in its shorter form. In fact, if you think about it, this entire chromatic sequence is nothing but a series of dominant tonic resolutions. You have A resolving to D, and B resolving to E. You could keep going with this. You could do C sharp resolving to F sharp, E flat resolving to A flat, and so on. In my case, I shuffled the chord voicings around specifically to get to the dominant using that wide interval on the bass strings for extra power. For the keyboard part, I had this cool pattern that I wanted to use. It's basically one part played by interlocked hands, where you have bass notes and melody notes fused together into one pattern. It's almost like a Stevie Wonder clavinet part, where the left and right hands trade off on bass notes inside the melody line. It's also a lot like tapping, where you use two hands to play one part that's a combination of harmony notes in the left hand and a melody note tapped out by the right hand. The only problem with this is that it was just way too busy and didn't really fit the song. So I took a fancy part and quantized it to a big value so all the notes mashed up on top of each other. Then I cut out a bunch of them. Then I threw on some delay. And this is what we ended up with. Absolutely no resemblance whatsoever. Oh well. Most of the lead playing in the song is strictly melodic in nature. I took a couple passes through the tune, playing whatever came to mind, looking for lead lines that were memorable. When I played the opening statement, I liked that. And that became the basis for another call and response thing with the next line. And the one after that. Now, these lines work because they emphasize tones in the underlying chord progression. For example, the melody starts out in E minor, then descends to C by way of a slide from C to D and back to C. And that emphasizes the tonic of the underlying C chord that it's played over. Now, the drama of this comes from the opposing motion of climbing all the way up to G and then swooping in underneath. The next figure targets the note A, and it does so with a slide that recalls the melody we just played over the C chord. Now, since the note A is common to both the A chord and the D chord, that means this little figure can take place over both of those changes. But when I'm actually doing this kind of work, I'm not really thinking about chord tones and scale degrees at all. That end of things happens almost automatically. It's kind of like humming, where you've internalized a certain song to such a degree that you can seek out melodies and variations on it without having to think too much about it. And the cool thing about composing for a show is that when you do find these cool melodies, you don't just have to toss them out after one use, you can develop them across different scenes. The opening statement of the arcade solo became the lead-in melody to this song at the beginning of episode 1 called Overture 1986. It's the same statement, but then it moves off in a much more melancholy direction, and it's cool to be able to do that type of thematic development with something that you like. For the final lick, I wanted something powerful and a little bit scary. So I thought about attaching descending fours to some kind of scale. But you know what? Descending fours is actually kind of boring. Harmonically, it doesn't really harmonize anything. It's just a scale played over itself. Plus, I realize that whatever I'm playing here kind of needs to be in the upper registers to be heard over the other guitars because everything is on 11 at this point. So the workaround is a circular pattern of fours that does 3 repetitions of 4 in one position, then moves up one position and does it again. This is all alternate picking starting on a downstroke. Now this is powerful. There's so much cool stuff going on in the chords that it'd be kind of a shame not to say something about that. So I came up with this 2-string arpeggio pattern that you can move through positions to exactly pace the underlying progression. Descending fours already ate up 2 of the chords, so we're on the D chord now. And the pattern that I've concocted is actually a B minor 7 pattern. Here's the fingering. You can think of this as B minor 7, which is B, D, F sharp, and A. Or you can think of it as D major 6, D, F sharp, A, and B. Doesn't matter, same notes. You can play D major 6 over a B in the bass. You can play B minor 7 over a D in the bass. In fact, no matter which bass note you choose, minor 7 and major 6 are almost the same chord. The reality is I'm using it here for mechanical considerations. I want those 2 notes on the B string because of the combination of alternate picking and sweeping that I'm using. The next chord up is the dominant chord. So the trick is to take this pattern and translate it to the new harmony while keeping the essential mechanics intact. I decided to do this with an augmented dominant. And that's because augmented is cool. And also, the whole point of this pattern is to enable us to do stuff that's interesting. Here's the voicing I'm using. In the name of interesting, you'll notice I'm also including the natural 5, as well as the major 7. And of course, these are mechanical considerations because I'm maintaining the same number of notes per string that I had in the B minor 7 version of the pattern. But I also think that these chord tones in particular enhance that ambiguous, almost anti-gravity feel that augmented chords tend to have. And just like we saw with the dominant tonic chromatic pattern in the chord progression, you don't have to stop at E. You can take this pattern all the way up the neck. And when you've gone so far up the neck that you can't go any further, you'll know that you've reached the end of the arcade analysis video. Because if I don't stop talking now, I probably will have to go back to 1986 just to fit in all the things I want to say in these behind-the-scenes features. But there's plenty more of this in Cracking the Code. And don't forget to check out Season 2, where we apply exactly this type of analytical thinking to the fascinating world of picking mechanics.